My son, in front of my ex-wife and her new husband, slammed his fist on the table of a five-star restaurant. He pointed right at my chest and screamed, "You are a loser, Dad. My mom's new husband isn't." The entire room froze. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. As I calmly folded my cloth napkin, I wasn't feeling shame. I was calculating. They thought they were humiliating a poor, forgotten jazz musician. They had absolutely no idea they had just insulted the man who secretly paid for their cars, their apartment, and every dollar in their bank accounts. And I was about to turn off the tap. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know in the comments where you're listening to this story from. And if you have ever felt underestimated by your own family, hit that like button and subscribe, because my story is one you need to hear. My name is Augustus King, and I am 70 years old. The restaurant was the kind of place I've avoided my entire life. It was called La Veta, perched on the roof of the tallest high-rise in Atlanta. Everything was glass and dark wood, and the waiters moved like silent ghosts. The air smelled like money and truffle oil. I felt like a crow in a cage of peacocks. My tweed jacket was clean, my shoes were shined, but they weren't Gucci, they weren't Armani, they were just comfortable. I was only there because of my son Andre. He had called me 3 days earlier, his voice tight with that specific anxiety he gets when he's trying to impress someone. "Dad, they're in town. Serafina and Brad. They want to have dinner. All of us. Saturday. La Veta." Serafina, my ex-wife. She left me 10 years ago. She said I was boring. She said I was stuck playing my old music in my small house. She said she needed a life with more shine. She found that shine in Bradley Van Horn, a slick, fast-talking real estate developer with a smile as white and artificial as a strip mall. Across the table, they looked like a magazine advertisement. Serafina, who I remembered in faded jeans, was now draped in emerald green silk, heavy gold bracelets clanking on her wrist every time she reached for her wine. Brad, loud and suntanned, wore a watch so large and bright it practically blinded me. Next to them sat my son Andre and his wife Amber. Amber, who is white, was staring at Brad Van Horn like he was the second coming. "Gus, you made it," Serafina said, her voice dripping with the fake syrupy pity she had perfected. She leaned across the table, offering me a cheek that smelled like expensive perfume. "How nice of you to come all this way." "It's just across town, Serafina," I said quietly. Brad laughed, a loud, booming sound that made the couple at the next table flinch. "He means all this way in life, Gus. Look at this place. Bet they don't have this down in the West End, huh?" Amber giggled. Andre just stared at his water glass. I knew this was a performance. I was the prop, the before picture they needed to highlight their glorious after. I was the ghost of poverty past, invited to a feast to prove how far they had come. I just smiled and nodded. "It's a nice place, Brad." The waiter arrived, a young man so stiff he looked like he was in pain. He handed us menus that were the size of small posters bound in heavy leather. I opened it and saw words I didn't recognize, followed by numbers that made no sense. A simple steak was listed as filet de boeuf executif for $180. Brad didn't even read the menu. He waved a dismissive hand. "Just bring the Barolo, the 2010, and we'll start with the Osetra caviar for the table. Except, maybe not for Gus. Looks like he might prefer a beer, huh?" "Water is fine for me," I said. Serafina placed her hand heavy with diamonds on Brad's arm. "Oh, Bradley, be nice. Gus is simple. He likes simple things. It's quaint." "Simple is one word for it," Brad said, winking at Amber. Amber, my daughter-in-law, jumped right in, her voice eager. "Oh, Brad, Andre is so fascinated by your investment strategies. He really is. He's always saying he wishes he had a real mentor, someone who actually achieved something, you know." There it was, the first cut. I glanced at Andre. He wouldn't look at me. He just took a long, deep drink of his wine. "Well, it's not magic," Brad boasted, leaning back so everyone could admire his diamond watch. "It's about vision. It's about being aggressive. You don't get a fleet of Bentleys by playing it safe, right?" "We just got back from Dubai." Serafina chimed in perfectly on cue. "The shopping, Gus. You just wouldn't believe it. I bought this bracelet there." She shook her wrist again, the gold clanking. "And Brad is closing on a new property, a $10 million deal. Isn't that right, darling?" "Just a little something," Brad said, polishing his nails on his lapel. "You gotta keep moving. Stagnation is death. Right, Gus?" He was looking right at me. Stagnation. That was his word for me. The man who still lived in the same neighborhood, who still played the same music, who still wore the same old jacket. I didn't rise to the bait. I just sipped my water. My silence seemed to infuriate them more than an argument would have. It was like they needed me to be visibly impressed or visibly pathetic. My calm neutrality was ruining their performance. Serafina decided to change tactics, turning the full force of her toxic pity directly on me. "Gus, darling," she said, her voice softening into a purr I knew well. It was the voice she used just before she asked for something or just before she delivered a killing blow. "We were talking, Brad and I, and we are worried about you." "Worried about me, Serafina? I'm fine." "No, you're not," she insisted, shaking her head slowly. "You're still in that tiny, drafty house in the West End." Andre told us. "It's falling apart. The neighborhood isn't safe. You're 70 years old, Gus. You're all alone. It's sad." Amber nodded, her expression a perfect mask of fake concern. "She's right, Gus. Andre and I worry constantly. What if you fall? What if someone breaks in?" Brad leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "What Serafina is trying to say, Gus, is that it's time to be realistic. A man has to know when to accept he's at the end of his road. It's time to upgrade. We've been looking at some wonderful assisted living facilities, top-notch. They have nurses and activities." "I don't need a nurse, Brad," I said, my voice still even. This is when Andre snapped. He had been silent this whole time, his face getting redder with every glass of wine. He was trapped. He was trapped between the man he wanted to be, the man his wife and mother demanded he be, and the man he was. He looked at me, his father, and all he saw was an obstacle. "Dad, why do you have to be so damn difficult?" he said, his voice suddenly loud. "Andre," I said, trying to warn him. "No, I'm tired of this. I'm tired of being embarrassed," he hissed. "Embarrassed. Yes, embarrassed. Look at you. You look like you just crawled out from under a bridge. We're at Lavetta, Brad and Serafina flew in from Dubai, and you show up in that." He gestured wildly at my jacket. "These are my clothes, son." "They're a joke," he said, his voice rising. "Just like that stupid house, Serafina is right. It's a dump. We're trying to help you, and you're too proud and stubborn to accept it. You're too stuck in the past. Don't you get it? No one cares about your old jazz music anymore. It's over." I tried to de-escalate. I tried to find my son under all that rage. "Andre, let's talk about this later. How is that new project at work coming along?" That was the final match on the gasoline. Andre stood up so fast his chair screeched on the marble floor. The entire restaurant, all the quiet conversations, all the clinking forks, stopped. Dead silence. He slammed both hands on the table. Glasses jumped. Water spilled. "Work!" he screamed. His face was contorted purple with a rage that wasn't just about tonight. It was about his whole life. "How can I focus on work? How can I get promoted? Don't you understand? I have to work twice as hard as everyone else just to overcome where I came from, just to prove I'm not you." He was breathing hard, pointing at Brad, who was watching this with a detached, amused smirk. "Look at him," Andre shouted, his voice cracking. "Look at Brad. He's respected. He makes things happen. He just closed a $10 million deal. He's a winner. He knows how to live." Then he turned that trembling finger on me. "And you," he spat. The entire room was holding its breath. "You're a loser. You've always been a loser. That's why Mom left you. That's why I'm stuck. You are a loser." "Dad, my mom's new husband isn't—" The words echoed in the sudden absolute silence. Andre stood there, panting, his chest heaving. Amber was looking at him with shining, proud eyes. Serafina and Brad shared a look of pure, smug victory. This was the moment they had been waiting for, the complete and total humiliation of Augustus King. I looked at my son, the boy I taught how to play the trumpet, the boy whose college tuition I paid for, the boy I had loved unconditionally for 40 years, and I saw a stranger. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel shame. I felt a profound stillness, a cold, clear, and terrible calm. I didn't say a word. While everyone stared, I slowly, methodically picked up my heavy cloth napkin. I folded it once. Then I folded it again, making a perfect square. I placed it gently on the table next to my plate of untouched $180 steak. I pushed my chair back, the legs making a soft, polite sound on the floor. I stood up. I adjusted my old tweed jacket, straightening the lapels. I looked at Brad. I looked at Serafina. I looked at Amber. And then I looked at my son. He was still standing, his eyes wide, waiting for me to yell, to cry, to break. I just held his gaze for a long second. Then I turned my back on all of them. I walked away. I didn't rush. I walked with my head held high past the tables of silent diners, past the horrified waiters, through the enormous glass doors and out into the cool Atlanta night. As the doors closed behind me, I heard it. It wasn't Andre's voice. It wasn't Brad's. It was Serafina's. A sharp, triumphant, dismissive laugh that cut through the silence. They thought they had won. They thought they had finally broken me. They had no idea what I was about to do. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The echo of Serafina's sharp, triumphant laugh followed me through the restaurant's heavy glass doors. It was a brittle sound, like expensive crystal shattering on a marble floor. It was the sound of her victory. The valet, a young man in a perfectly pressed red coat, rushed over to me. "Taxi, sir?" he asked. His eyes did a quick, professional scan. He took in my old tweed jacket, my simple leather shoes, and the deep lines on my face. Then his gaze flickered back toward the glowing warmth of the restaurant, a place where entrees cost more than my entire outfit. His face settled into an expression of polite pity. He saw exactly what my family wanted him to see. A poor, forgotten old man. A loser. "No, thank you," I said. My voice came out steady, much steadier than I felt. My hand resting in my pocket wasn't shaking. It was clenched. I walked away from the curb past the long, gleaming line of black town cars and idling limousines waiting for the other more important guests. I didn't turn left toward the MARTA station the way Andre always assumed I traveled. I turned right. I walked 2 blocks down Peachtree Street, the cool Atlanta night air hitting my face. It felt good. It was a clean feeling after the suffocating, perfume-filled air of that dining room. They thought that word loser would break me. They thought that public humiliation would be the final straw, the thing that would finally make me small enough to be controlled, to be pitied, to be brushed aside. 10 years. For 10 years since Serafina left me, I had let them believe it. I had let them think I was just a washed-up jazz musician clinging to an old house in the West End, playing my trumpet in dusty, half-empty clubs for pocket change. I let Serafina think she had escaped a sinking ship. I let my son Andre believe he was ashamed of me. I let him mistake my silence for weakness. I let him mistake my humility for poverty. It is a very common mistake, and a very, very expensive one. I stopped in front of a tall, anonymous gray building. It had no sign. It wasn't a luxury condo. It was a private, secure parking garage. From the outside, it looked like a concrete box. I pulled a small, heavy, unadorned key fob from my pocket, the one that did not go to my house in the West End. I pointed it at the solid steel security door. There was a quiet electronic beep, and the massive door groaned to life, rolling upward with a heavy, satisfying sound. It revealed a single brightly lit, immaculate garage bay. There was only one vehicle inside. It was not a 20-year-old Buick. It was a 2025 Rolls-Royce Cullinan, custom-built, midnight black. The interior was a deep, rich crimson leather. It was a $400,000 Fortress, and I had paid for it in cash last month as a small retirement gift to myself. I pressed the fob again. The cabin lights glowed softly. The spirit of ecstasy. The silver statue on the hood rose up, catching the light. I got in. The door closed with a heavy, satisfying thunk, sealing out the entire world. The air inside smelled of hand-stitched leather and polished wood. I pressed the ignition button. The 12-cylinder engine started without a sound. It was more of a vibration, a whisper of immense waiting power. I pulled out of the garage, the steel door closing silently behind me. I merged into the Atlanta traffic. I did not drive toward the West End. Serafina was right about the house. It is old. It is drafty, which is why I only use it as my private recording studio. No, I drove north. I drove straight into the heart of Buckhead, the wealthiest and most exclusive neighborhood in the city. I drove past the sprawling white-pillared mansions, past the high-end boutiques. I pulled up to a sleek glass tower that pierced the night sky, a building so exclusive it didn't even have a name on the front, just a discreet address. A uniformed doorman, a man named Thomas, who knew my name, rushed out. He didn't look at me with pity. He looked at me with professional respect. "Good evening, Mr. King. A difficult night." "You could say that, Thomas," I said, handing him the keys to the Rolls-Royce. I walked across the silent, cavernous lobby. It was decorated with art that was worth more than Brad Van Horn's entire net worth, though he would never know it. I walked to the private elevator at the back. I used my personal security key. The elevator didn't have buttons for other floors. It just had one. The top. The doors opened silently directly into my home, a 3,000-square-foot full-floor penthouse. The floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around the entire apartment, and the lights of the Atlanta skyline glittered below me like a carpet of shattered diamonds. My Fazioli grand piano sat in the far corner, its black lacquer reflecting the city lights. This was my home. This was the life the loser lived. My son, my foolish, arrogant son, and my greedy ex-wife. They had no idea. They had been dining out on my perceived failure for a decade, never once stopping to ask a single real question. And now they had finally crossed the line. I walked over to my desk, sat down in my leather chair, and looked at the city. They thought I was a loser. They thought I was powerless. They had no idea that I was the one who held all the cards. And I was about to play my hand. I stood in front of the glass wall of my penthouse looking out over the Atlanta skyline. The city lights glittered below like a carpet of diamonds. They were silent, beautiful, and cold. Down there in that overpriced restaurant, my son and my ex-wife were probably ordering another $200 bottle of wine. They were laughing at me, laughing at the loser dad who had just walked out too pathetic to even defend himself. My son's voice echoed in the perfect silence of my home. Loser. He spat the word like it was poison. And perhaps it was. But it wasn't my poison. It was his. I walked over to the Fazioli grand piano that sat in the corner, its black lacquer reflecting the city lights like a dark mirror. I ran my fingers over the keys, the polished ivory cool and smooth beneath my touch. I didn't play a note. I didn't need to. The silence in this room was worth more than all the noise they were making back at that restaurant. They see Augustus King, the old man in the worn-out jacket. They see the small crumbling house in the West End, the one I keep because the acoustics in the main room are perfect, because the walls still smell like 30 years of history, like vinyl and sweat and inspiration. They see exactly what I have allowed them to see for the last 10 years. They don't see Gus King, the Gus King whose signature is at the bottom of music history. The Gus King who in 1973 took a $2,000 loan and a lifetime of talent and co-founded a small, hungry label out of a dusty garage in Macon. We called it Soul City Records. Serafina knew that man. She was there when we pressed our first single. She was there when we discovered the Midnight Pillars when we signed Clara May. She was there for the struggle, the late nights, the cheap whiskey, and the sudden blinding highs. But Serafina always hated the struggle. She wanted the prize, but she despised the fight. 10 years ago, she sat right where I'm sitting now, not in this penthouse, but in the old West End house. The music industry was on its knees. CD sales were dead. Digital downloads were a joke. We weren't making what we used to. She looked at me, her eyes as cold as the ice in Brad's whiskey glass. "It's over, Gus," she said. Her voice wasn't sad, it was final. "This music, this relic, it's dead. You're stuck in the past. You're a relic. And I will not be married to a relic." She thought I was finished. She thought the ship was sinking. So she took her settlement, a very generous one, I thought at the time, and she left. She jumped from my sinking ship right onto Bradley Van Horn's plastic yacht, all in one smooth, practiced motion. She left me for new money, for Dubai, for Bentleys, for a life of shiny, hollow things. She left in 2015. What Serafina, in all her forward-thinking wisdom, didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was what would happen next. In 2016, the streaming boom began. And suddenly the entire world woke up and remembered what real music sounded like. Suddenly that old jazz music my son is so deeply ashamed of wasn't a relic. It was an asset. That dead catalog I refused to sell, the one I held on to while the industry burned around me, became the single hottest property in music. That old Midnight Pillars track it played during the Super Bowl halftime show last year. The royalties from that one night, from that one song, paid for this entire penthouse, in cash. That soul ballad by Clara May that Serafina always hated. A 20-year-old rapper sampled it last month. It went to #1 in 12 countries. I own 50%. 50% of everything. Brad Van Horn boasts about a $10 million deal. That's cute. My son Andre thinks I make what, maybe $40,000 a year if I'm lucky. My corporation, the one Mr. Morrison manages quietly, from a discreet office downtown, pulls in more than that every single day. Before I even get out of bed, every time someone in Tokyo clicks play on a Soul City classic, I get paid. Every time a kid in London uses one of my bass lines in a TikTok video, I get paid. Every time a Hollywood blockbuster needs a classic sound to feel authentic, they call me. And they pay. Serafina divorced a relic. She had absolutely no idea she was divorcing the king. I walked over to my desk. I picked up a small framed photo. It was Andre, maybe 10 years old, holding his first trumpet. My trumpet. His smile was wide and genuine, filling his whole face. He hadn't learned to be ashamed of me yet. He hadn't learned to measure a man's worth by his watch. I kept it all a secret. For him. I had seen what unearned money does to kids. I saw it in the music industry every day. It makes them soft. It makes them weak. It makes them entitled. It makes them exactly what Andre has become. My silence, my plan to protect him, it failed. It didn't make him strong. It just made him hungry for what he didn't have. It made him look at me, his own father, and see nothing but failure. Because I wasn't loud like Brad. I wasn't shiny like Serafina's jewelry. He called me a loser. I walked back to the window, the glass cool against my forehead. The city lights were bright, but my anger was brighter. It was a cold, clean, purifying anger. Serafina thinks I'm poor. Andre thinks I'm a failure. Brad thinks I'm an old fool, a potential mark to be scammed. They have built their entire world, their entire sense of superiority on the foundation of my failure. And I am about to pull that foundation out from under them. I sat down at my desk, the real one. Not the cluttered workbench in the West End studio, but the massive hand-carved mahogany desk in my penthouse office. It was silent up here, no traffic, no neighbors, just the quiet hum of the air filtration system. My plan had been so simple, so pure, I thought. When Andre was a boy, I gave him everything I never had. Music lessons, books, a safe home. But as he grew, I saw a weakness in him. He had his mother's eyes and her appetite. He loved the idea of success, but he seemed allergic to the work that came with it. He wanted the applause without the practice. So when Serafina left, I made a choice. I would not be the rich father who handed his son a life on a silver platter. No. I would let him believe the lie. I would let him believe his mother left me because I was a failure. I would let him think I was just a poor, struggling musician. I wanted him to fight. I wanted him to build his own life. I wanted him to become a man on his own terms, forged in his own fire, not coasting on the dying embers of mine. I wanted him to be better than me. I wanted him to earn his success so that no one, not even a woman like his mother, could ever make him feel small. What a fool I was. A romantic, sentimental fool. I didn't forge a man. I just gave him an excuse. My failure became his crutch. It became the reason he couldn't succeed, the anchor he could blame for all his own shortcomings. He called me a loser. The bitter irony is that on some level he was right. Because my son Andre King at 40 years old is a complete and total failure. And the only reason he doesn't know it, the only reason he can sit in a 5-star restaurant next to his shiny new stepfather and call me a loser is because I, the loser, have been secretly funding his entire pathetic life. He thinks I live in that tiny West End house. He has no idea who really owns the luxury high-rise condo he lives in. He has no idea who really pays the $2,500 a month homeowners association fee. He thinks he got a great deal on his lease. He doesn't know that the leasing company is a shell corporation owned by Soul City Records. He's been living in my property for 5 years rent-free and calls it making it. He thinks that gleaming white BMW M5 in his parking spot is a sign of his success as a junior marketing consultant. He has no idea that the car is leased by my corporation under my name. He thinks the low monthly payment is because of his great credit. He doesn't know it's because the payment is just an internal transfer in my accounting books. And the worst part, the part that makes my stomach turn with a sickness I can't even name. The trust fund. About 5 years ago, Andre came to me not here in the penthouse but at the West End studio. He was wringing his hands full of excuses. He had credit card debt. He was behind on his car payment. He was going to be evicted. I should have let him fail. God, I should have let him hit rock bottom right then. But he was my son. And he was crying. So I invented a story. I told him my parents, his grandparents, people who died with barely a penny to their name, had apparently left a small secret trust fund for him. a delayed inheritance. For the last 60 months, my lawyer, Mr. Morrison, has been wiring $10,000 on the first of every month into Andre's checking account. $10,000 every month. He called it his seed money. He told his friends it was old family money. And tonight, high on his mother's praise and his stepfather's false glamour, he used that money, my money, to buy an $80 steak just so he could have the privilege of standing up and spitting in my face. He called me a loser while surviving on my charity. He called me a failure while living in my house and driving my car. He, Amber, Serafina, and Brad, they all sat there wrapped in their bubble of smug superiority and laughed. They laughed at the man who was paying for their entire illusion. I picked up the phone. It was heavy in my hand. It wasn't my cell. It was the secure line on my desk, the one that went directly to Morrison. It was 3 a.m, but I knew he'd be awake. He always is. He picked up on the first ring. Augustus, I saw the restaurant reservation. I assumed I'd be hearing from you. How bad was it? I leaned back in my chair looking at the glittering, silent city lights. He called me a loser, Morrison. There was a long pause on the other end. I see, Morrison finally said, his voice cold and precise. So after 10 years, it's time. It's time, I said. Shut it all down. Now. I sat there in my office, the city lights blurring into a watercolor painting of reds and golds through the glass. The silence was absolute. My son's voice, raw and full of contempt, was the only thing I could hear. You're a loser. A loser. A loser who had paid for the expensive private high school that gave him his superior education. A loser who had paid for the Ivy League college he dropped out of. A loser who for the last 5 years had personally funded the very air he breathed. He and his mother and his new shiny stepfather, they had all laughed. They had laughed at their own lifeline. They had spat on the hand that was secretly, patiently feeding them. My anger wasn't hot. It wasn't the explosive rage of my son. It was cold. It was a cold, quiet, calculating weight that settled deep in my chest. It was the anger of a king who had just been mocked by a court jester who didn't realize the king owned the entire castle. I had let this go on for too long. My silence, my desire to protect him from failure, I saw it clearly now. It had not been kindness. It had been cowardice. I hadn't been protecting him. I had been enabling him. I had been building this monster of entitlement, feeding it $10,000 at a time. He wanted a winner. He wanted to see what a winner does. Fine. I would show him. I picked up the heavy, old-fashioned telephone on my mahogany desk. This wasn't my cell phone. This was a secure, hardwired line. There was only one number programmed into its speed dial. I pressed the button. It rang once. Augustus! Mr. Morrison's voice was sharp, awake, and professional, even at what was now approaching 3 o'clock in the morning. He had been my lawyer, my business manager, and my confidant for 40 years. He was the only other person on earth who knew the full truth. Morrison, I said. My own voice sounded strange to me. It was perfectly calm, flat, devoid of all emotion. I saw the reservation for 4 at La Veta on your calendar, Morrison said, his voice equally flat. I assumed I would be hearing from you. How bad was it? I leaned back in my leather chair, the skyline glittering in my eyes. He called me a loser, Morrison. There was a pause, not for shock. It was a pause of deep, profound understanding. It was the sound of a man processing the end of an era. I see, Morrison said, his voice turning to ice. So, after 10 years of this experiment, Augustus, is it time? It's time, I said. Shut it all down. All of it. All of it. I want you to start right now. I don't want to wait for the banks to open. I want the wheels in motion before the sun comes up. I could hear the faint sound of a keyboard clicking as Morrison opened my files. Let's be precise then. We will begin with the King Family Heritage Trust. I let out a dry, harsh laugh. You mean the direct wire transfer I authorized from my personal savings? Yes. Let's start there. Terminate it. Not on the 1st of the month. I want it terminated today. I want his next automatic payment to bounce. I want his account to be empty. Understood, Morrison said. Item 2, the vehicle, the 2024 BMW M5 White. It's leased under the Soul City Legacy Corporate Holding, correct? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Correct. The lease is in our name. He is merely the authorized driver. Good. Terminate the authorization. I want a tow truck at his apartment building by 6 a.m. I don't care what the early termination penalty is. Pay it. I want him to walk out of that building late for his imaginary job and find nothing but an empty parking space. Send the recovery team. Consider it done, Morrison said, his typing becoming faster. Item 3, the residence, Unit 34B, the Atlantic. My condo, I said. Technically the corporation's condo. The lease agreement is guaranteed by your holding company. I know, I said. I want them out. He's not on the lease. He's listed as a permanent guest, correct? A guest whose privileges have just been revoked. Augustus, that lease is guaranteed for another 6 months, Morrison said, the first note of caution in his voice. Morrison, I said, my voice dropping. You are the best and most ruthless corporate lawyer in Atlanta. I pay you a staggering amount of money for that very reason. I am certain that lease has a loophole, a missed payment, a violation of terms. Hell, I own the building, find a way. I want an eviction notice taped to his door by noon tomorrow. 30 days. No, make it 3. 3 days to vacate for breach of contract. I don't care what you have to do. Make it legal. There was another long silence. I heard him take a deep breath. Augustus, he said softly, this will be catastrophic for him. He has nothing. He is nothing without you. I know, I said. He just explained that to me in front of a room full of strangers. He is the son of a loser. A loser can't afford to pay for a BMW, a luxury condo, and a $10,000 a month allowance, can he? Morrison didn't reply. He wants a winner for a Father Morrison. He admires Brad Van Horn. He admires men who are aggressive. He admires men who make things happen. Well, I'm about to make something happen. I'm about to give my son the one thing he's never had in his entire life. And what's that, Augustus King? Consequences. It is done, Morrison said. The wires are being stopped. The recovery team will be dispatched at 5:30 a.m., and I will personally draft the eviction notice. I'll have it delivered by a marshal tomorrow. Thank you, Morrison. Good night, Augustus. I hung up the phone. I didn't feel relief. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt quiet. I had just taken a 40-year-old man, my only son, and stripped him of his car, his home, and his income, all with a single 2-minute phone call. The tap was off. The illusion was shattered. I looked at the picture of him on my desk, the one with the trumpet and the bright, innocent smile. All right, son, I whispered to the empty room. You wanted to see what a winner does. Let's see how you do now that the loser is no longer picking up the check. Andre probably woke up around 11 a.m. He always slept late, especially after a night of celebration like the one at Lavetta. He would have woken up with a pounding headache, the kind that comes from too much expensive wine, the kind of wine I had paid for, though he never knew it. His wife Amber would be beside him in the $1,000 sheets I paid for, complaining about the sunlight and the luxury apartment I paid for. He would stumble out of bed late for the marketing consultant job I had secured for him through an old acquaintance. He wouldn't even shower. He'd just splash cold water on his face, pull a wrinkled $500 shirt over his head, and grab his keys. He'd kiss Amber goodbye, promising to take her shopping later. A promise he fully intended to keep using my money. I can picture him perfectly. Taking the express elevator down to the private heated garage. Whistling, perhaps, still full of himself, still tasting the victory of the night before the night he had finally put his old loser father in his place. He would walk to his designated space, number 34B. And then he would stop. He would blink. He would rub his hungover, bloodshot eyes. He would look again. The space would be empty. Just a dark, rectangular oil stain on the clean concrete floor where my $60,000 Alpine white BMW M5 used to be. His first thought, I am certain, was theft. How could this happen? Here in this secure building, he would feel violated, outraged. How could someone dare to steal from him? He would storm over to the security booth by the exit, ready to scream at the attendant. Where is my car? My white BMW. Did you see anything? Check the cameras. And the attendant, a man named Miguel, whom I had spoken to personally at 5 a.m., would just look at him with a tired, bored expression. He wouldn't argue. He wouldn't check any cameras. He would simply reach under his desk and pull out a single folded piece of paper. Andre would snatch it from his hand. He would unfold it, his eyes scanning the page, his brain struggling to understand. This wasn't a police report. It wasn't a note from the building manager. It was an official corporate notice. Vehicle repossession, the header read. This vehicle, a BMW M5, has been reclaimed by the primary leaseholder due to the immediate termination of the supplemental driver agreement by the financial guarantor. This is the part that would truly confuse him. Guarantor, he would say out loud, his voice echoing in the empty garage. What guarantor? He would run back to the elevator, ride it up, and burst into the apartment, waving the paper at Amber. They took it. They just took the car. Who took it? Amber would scream. The police? No, the bank. The guarantor. What does that even mean? The car is in my name. He was so proud of that lie. He loved telling his friends that he had bought the M5. He had no idea his name was only listed on the authorized driver line. He didn't know that the King Family Heritage Trust was the legal entity on the lease, the same trust that paid for his life. He would be pacing the living room now, his mind scrambling. It had to be a mistake, a massive bank error. It had to be tied to the trust fund. The trust fund, the imaginary safety net I had woven for him. The inheritance from grandparents who died with nothing but a mortgaged house and a box of old photographs. That had to be the problem, of course. It was my fault. It was always somehow my fault. I was in my studio in the West End when the call came. The old black rotary phone on my desk suddenly jangled its sound, harsh and loud in the quiet room. I let it ring. Once, twice, 3 times. I let the panic build. On the 4th ring, I picked up. Hello? Dad. Dad, finally. Thank God. His voice was high, sharp, and laced with pure, unfiltered annoyance. He wasn't scared. He was inconvenienced. He wasn't calling to apologize for last night. He was calling to complain about this morning. Something is wrong, Dad. Seriously wrong. The bank or someone I don't know. They took the M5. They towed it right out of the garage. There's a notice here, something about a guarantor. It has to be that trust fund account you manage. The one from Grandma and Grandpa. I held the phone to my ear, listening. In the background, I could hear Amber starting to wail. What are we going to do, Andre? What about my nail appointment? How will I get there? I know, baby. I know, he snapped at her. Then his voice was back in my ear, demanding, Dad, did you hear me? You need to call the bank. You need to call whoever manages that fund, and you need to fix this. I have to get to work. This is a nightmare. I held the receiver, feeling the cool, heavy plastic in my hand. I pictured him standing there in his luxury apartment, barefoot on the expensive hardwood floors I paid for, looking out over a city he hadn't earned. I waited 1 beat, 2 beats. I let the silence stretch, filling it with his own rapidly growing panic. A car, I said finally. My voice was quiet, calm. They took your car, Andre. Yes, that's what I just said, the BMW. It's gone. Really, son? I said. I let a small, cool smile touch my words. That's too bad. That sounds difficult. There was a stunned silence on his end. He was expecting me to jump. He was expecting me to say, Don't worry, son, I'll handle it. He was expecting me to fix it, just like I had fixed every other problem in his entire adult life. He was not expecting indifference. Difficult, too bad, Dad. This isn't too bad. This is my car. I need you to call the bank and fix this right now. What if they made a mistake with the trust fund? A mistake, I repeated slowly. No, Andre, I don't think it was a mistake. What? What do you mean? I mean, I don't think I can fix it, son, I said. I don't know anything about those kinds of things. Guarantors, lease agreements, banks, that's complicated business. That's for winners. I heard his sharp intake of breath. Dad, what are you talking about? Just make the call. Me, I said. Andre, I'm just a loser. You explained that very clearly last night in front of everyone. A loser can't handle high-end car financing. You need someone aggressive. You need someone who knows how to make things happen. Dad, this isn't funny. Stop playing games. I think you should call Brad, I said, and my voice was as cold and sharp as a razor. He's the winner. He closes $10 million deals. I am sure a man like that can get your car back in a heartbeat. Dad, wait. I pressed the receiver down, cutting off his panicked plea. I hung up the phone. I stood there in the quiet of my studio, the smell of old wood dust and sheet music all around me. I pictured my son in that cold, empty garage holding a useless phone, his face pale with confusion and a new, unfamiliar feeling. Fear. The first thread was cut. The car was gone. Tomorrow the money. The day after that, the house. The game had just begun. If the loss of the car was the appetizer, then today was the main course. I knew my son. The car was a blow to his ego. But the money, the $10,000 that appeared in his account every month like magic, that was his oxygen. That was the fuel for his entire illusion of a life. And I had just cut the line. I sat in my penthouse sipping my first cup of strong black coffee. It was 10 a.m. I imagined Andre was still asleep, hungover from the stress of the previous day, oblivious to the fact that his real problems were just beginning. But I knew Amber wasn't asleep. Amber lived for two things: appearances and spending money. My money. The loss of the M5 would have felt like a personal attack on her status. She would need to fix it. She would need to go out and buy something to make herself feel better, to prove to the world and to herself that they were still on top. I could picture her clear as day. She would have put on her most expensive yoga outfit, the one she never actually did yoga in, and ordered a car service, annoyed at the inconvenience. She would have gone to Phipps Plaza, the temple of high-end Atlanta shopping. She would be at Saks, or maybe Neiman Marcus. She would have been there for an hour, demanding the attention of a personal shopper. She'd have an armful of designer clothes, a new handbag, maybe some shoes. She'd be at the private checkout counter sipping complimentary champagne, talking loudly about how stressful it was when the family office made a clerical error with their vehicles. And then she would hand over the Platinum American Express, the one linked directly to the trust, the one I paid the bill for every month. The sales associate, a woman with a polite, painted-on smile, would swipe the card. There would be a pause. The associate would smile a little tighter this time and swipe it again. The small screen would flash the same word: declined. "That's impossible," Amber would snap, her voice suddenly sharp. "Your machine must be broken. Try it again." "I apologize, ma'am," the associate would say, her politeness now a weapon. "I've run it twice. Perhaps you have another form of payment." Amber, her face flushing a deep, ugly red, would dig in her expensive purse. The other shoppers in the private lounge would be pretending not to watch, which meant they were watching every second. She would throw down a different card, a Visa signature, also linked to the trust. "Try this one." The associate would swipe it. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Declined." "What is going on?" Amber would be hissing now. She'd be looking around, her eyes narrowing. She would grab her debit card, the one linked directly to the $10,000 monthly deposit. "Fine, just use this. It's cash." The associate would run the debit card. The machine would pause, connecting to the bank. And then the final humiliating word: declined. Insufficient funds. Amber would freeze. This was not possible. That account always had money. "Ma'am," the sales associate would say, her voice now dripping with cold condescension, "the total is $3,400. Will you be paying, or shall I return these items to the floor?" I smiled as I pictured her walking out of that store empty-handed, her face burning with a humiliation that a leased BMW could never buy. She would get back in her hired car, and she would call her husband, and she would be screaming. The sound of my other phone, the cheap burner phone I used only for my family, would have shattered the silence of Andre's apartment. He would snatch it up. "Amber, what's wrong?" And then the flood. "What's wrong? Andre, what's wrong? All the cards. They're declined. Saks, Neiman's, even the debit card. Insufficient funds. What did you do? You said the trust paid for everything. You said we were fine." Andre would feel the blood drain from his face. The car was a problem. This was an apocalypse. "Calm down," he'd yell back. "It's the trust. It has to be that stupid bank. They must have frozen the account over the car. I'll fix it." He would hang up on her, his hands shaking. He would grab his laptop, his hands slipping on the keyboard. He would log into the private banking portal, the one Mr. Morrison had set up for him all those years ago. He would be staring at the main summary page. His eyes would scan for the scheduled transfer. "King Family Heritage Trust, monthly dispersal $10,000. It wasn't there. He would click on his checking account. The account that should have had at minimum $10,000 in it, plus whatever was left from last month. He would stare at the balance. Current available balance, $14.32. He would refresh the page. $14.32. He would refresh it again. and again, and again. The number wouldn't change. The money was not late. The money was gone. The $10,000 had not arrived. The car was not a mistake. The cards were not an error. This was real. He would grab his phone, his fingers trembling so badly he could barely dial the number for the bank, the number he had on speed dial for his private wealth manager. "King Private Bank, how may I help you?" "This is Andre King," he'd say, trying to sound important, trying to sound like a man who hadn't just seen his entire life evaporate. "I'm calling about the King Family Heritage Trust. My monthly deposit, my $10,000 deposit, it didn't arrive. There's been a massive error." The banker on the other end would be a polite, cold young woman. I knew her. Morrison had hired her specifically for this account. She was reading from a script. "One moment, Mr. King. Let me pull up your file." A pause, the click of a keyboard. "Ah, yes, I see your file right here, Andre King." "Well," Andre would demand, "where's my money?" "Sir," the banker would say, her voice perfectly neutral, "there appears to be no error. Our records show that yesterday, November 6th, we received a directive from the sole administrator and trustee of the fund." A directive? What directive? What are you talking about? "The directive, sir, was to terminate the trust. As of yesterday, the King Family Heritage Trust has been formally and permanently dissolved." Andre would stop breathing. "Dissolved? What do you mean dissolved? You can't dissolve it. That's my money. That's my inheritance." "According to our records, sir," the banker would continue, her voice like ice, "it was never your money. It was a discretionary fund, and the grantor's discretion has ended. All remaining assets have been reverted to the original grantor. The account is closed." "Grantor? What grantor? Who is the grantor? Tell me." "I'm afraid that information is confidential, Mr. King. Is there anything else I can help you with today?" "Yes." Andre would be screaming now, a desperate animal sound. "You can give me back my money." "I'm sorry, sir, that account no longer exists. Thank you for banking with us. Have a wonderful day." And then the click. Andre would be staring at his silent phone. He would be standing in an apartment he couldn't pay for, with a wife who had just been humiliated, with no car, with $14 to his name. The entire architecture of his life, the entire illusion he had built, had just been demolished in the span of 24 hours. He couldn't call me. He had already burned that bridge. He had called me a loser. He couldn't call Brad. Brad had already dismissed him. He was a 40-year-old man with no car, no money, and no skills, about to be homeless. He did the only thing a weak, desperate child knows how to do. He called his mother. I saw my other phone, the burner phone, light up with his name. I let it ring, and ring, and ring. He needed to feel this. He needed to understand what real failure felt like. Finally, I picked up. "Hello, Mom," he sobbed, all pretense of the winner gone. "Mom, it's all gone. The money, the trust fund, they dissolved it. The car is gone. The cards are gone. Everything is gone. I don't know what to do." I stood by my penthouse window, looking down at the city. "What?" I said, injecting the perfect amount of confusion into my voice. "What trust fund, Andre? What are you talking about?" I didn't have to be there to see what happened next. I knew my son. I knew my ex-wife. When a weak man's artificial world collapses, he doesn't look inward. He doesn't reflect. He just scrambles desperately for the next strong person to lean on. After Andre hung up with the bank, the silence in that luxury apartment must have been deafening. $14. The car gone. The magic money fountain turned off. He would have looked at Amber, his wife, his partner, and all this status-seeking madness, and he would have seen pure animal panic in her eyes. The life she had signed up for was evaporating before her very eyes. "What do we do?" she would have shrieked. "What do we do, Andre?" And Andre, a 40-year-old child, would have done the only thing he knew how to do. He would have run to his mother. He and Amber would have taken a car service, and Uber Black, probably still clinging to the last habits of a life they could no longer afford. They would have rushed to Serafina's sprawling suburban mansion, the one Brad Van Horn had bought her. The one that was, I suspected, mortgaged to the hilt. They would have found Serafina in her sitting room, probably planning her next trip to Dubai. "Mother," Andre would burst in, not even bothering to say hello. We have a problem. A huge problem. Serafina would look up annoyed at the interruption. Andre, what is it? Can't you see I'm busy? It's Dad, Andre would stammer, pacing the expensive rug. He's lost it. He's gone crazy. He cut off the trust fund. He took the car. Amber's cards are all declined. He's ruined us. And that is the moment Serafina would have felt the cold dread. Her entire relationship with Brad, her entire upgrade in life was built on an illusion. The illusion that she came from good stock, that her son had old family money. Andre's $10,000 a month trust fund and his shiny BMW were her proof. They were her assets. They were the collateral she brought to this new shiny marriage. If Andre was broke, her value to a man like Brad plummeted. What do you mean he cut it off? She would have hissed. It's dissolved. The bank said so. It's just gone. Mom, we have nothing. Serafina wouldn't hesitate. She would grab her purse. We're going to see Brad. He'll fix this. He's your stepfather. He's a winner. He'll sort this out. I can picture them, the three of them, pulling up to Brad's gleaming glass and steel office tower in Midtown. They would march through the lobby, a desperate, dysfunctional parade. They wouldn't even wait for the secretary. They would burst right into Brad's corner office. He'd be there, feet up on his massive desk, probably shouting into a headset about some fake multi-million-dollar deal. He would look up annoyed. Sarah, what's going on? I'm in the middle of closing a massive deal. Brad, thank God you're here. Serafina would say, her voice trembling, all the manufactured grace gone. Andre, pale and sweating, would just stand there looking like a little boy about to be punished. Brad, sir, he'd begin. We have a problem, a financial problem. This is the pivot, the exact moment the universe turns. See, I knew something about Brad Van Horn that my family didn't. I knew a con artist when I saw one. I had been in the music business for 50 years. I had met 100 Brad Van Horns. They live on illusion. They feed on the perception of wealth. Brad had been cozying up to Serafina and, by extension, to Andre. Why? Because Andre had a BMW and a $10,000 a month trust fund. To a man like Brad, that spelled deep family money. Old money. Brad wasn't being nice to Andre at dinner. He was grooming him. He was grooming me through him. That whole $10 million deal speech, that was for my benefit. He was baiting the hook, hoping to get the loser dad to invest his quaint savings into his massive Ponzi scheme. But now his marks were standing in his office, broke. Brad would slowly take his feet off the desk. His smile, that blindingly white artificial smile, would vanish. What kind of financial problem? He'd ask, his voice suddenly flat. It's the trust fund, Andre would stammer. The one from my father's side. It's been dissolved. Brad would freeze. This was not part of the plan. This was a disaster. To a con artist, this could mean only one thing: the money was gone. The well was dry. Or even worse, the real money man, the grantor, had somehow discovered the scam. My cutting off Andre would look to a man like Brad like I knew he was a fraud. It would look like I was battening down the hatches. It would look like I was the one who had made the first move. Dissolved. Brad would repeat the word, tasting like ash in his mouth. Yes. Serafina would wail, finally breaking. Gus is acting crazy. He cut Andre off. The car is gone. The money is gone. Brad, we need help. We need a loan just until we sort this out. 20,000, maybe 30. Just a bridge loan. For family. Brad would stand up from his desk. He would walk to the massive window looking down at the city below. He would be silent for a long, cold moment. When he turned around, the man from the restaurant was gone. The charming, boisterous, suntanned winner had been replaced by a stranger. His eyes were as cold and dead as a shark's. Alone, he'd say, as if he'd never heard the word before. Yes, please, Brad. Andre would beg. You're my stepfather. You're a winner. Brad would let out a short, ugly laugh. It was a sound with no humor in it at all. That's right, Andre, I am. And do you know why I'm a winner? Because I don't back losers. Because I don't throw good money after bad. Serafina's hand would fly to her mouth. Brad, what are you saying? I'm saying Brad would hiss that I am deeply, deeply disappointed. I thought I married into a family with a legacy, with assets. That's what you told me, Serafina. That's what your son's lifestyle suggested. He would walk over to Andre, looking him up and down with pure, undisguised contempt. You're not a junior consultant. You're a 40-year-old child living on an allowance. And your father, the loser, just cut you off. And now you come here to my office with your hands out. Please, Brad, Andre whispered, tears welling in his eyes. We have nowhere else to go. We need help. Brad would stare at him, letting the humiliation sink in. No, he'd say. I don't give loans, especially not to family. That's bad business. He would walk to his office door and open it, the gesture clear. But what are we supposed to do? Serafina asked, her voice a tiny squeak. Brad Van Horn would look at my son, the boy who had idolized him just 12 hours earlier, and he would give him the exact same advice I had given him in my head, only this time it was laced with pure poison. I don't know, Andre. Get a job, a real one. It's time you learn to stand on your own 2 feet. He would gesture to the open door. Now get out. My secretary will validate your parking, if you even have a car to park. And they would be forced to walk out past the secretary, who was trying not to smile past the other executives in the hall. They had been publicly humiliated at the restaurant, but this was different. This was worse. This was the man they admired, their winner, throwing them out like yesterday's trash. They were in the elevator, going down, the silence between them heavier than stone. No car, no money, and now no savior. They had only one place left to go, the one place in the world they were dreading. The loser's house, my house. The recovery of the car on Monday was the first crack in the dam. The dissolving of the trust fund on Tuesday was the moment the water burst through. Today was Wednesday. Today was the day the entire city they had built was swept away. I was in my penthouse, not the West End studio. I was sitting in my leather armchair, looking out over the city, a cup of fresh coffee in my hand. I wasn't waiting. I was anticipating. I knew my son and his wife. After Brad Van Horn had humiliated them, after they realized their winner was just another bully, they would have crawled back to their luxury apartment, their cage. They would be trapped there, surrounded by expensive furniture they couldn't move and clothes they could no longer afford. They would be paralyzed by fear. They would be pacing the floor, yelling at each other, blaming each other, trying to figure out how to survive on $14.32. They would be clinging to the one thing they thought they had left a roof over their heads. They would think, at least we have the apartment, the lease is paid for, we can stay here, we can figure this out. They had forgotten. I, the loser, was the guarantor. I pictured the scene as I sipped my coffee. The late afternoon sun would be slanting through their floor-to-ceiling windows. Andre would be staring at his silent phone, terrified it would ring. Amber would be sitting on the sofa crying, her mascara running. And then the sound, the ping of a new email arriving in Andre's laptop. He would jump, hoping it was the bank, hoping it was an apology, a mistake. He would open his laptop. The email was not from the bank. It was from Atlantic High-Rise Management. The subject line would hit him first. Urgent notice of immediate lease termination and demand to vacate. His hands would be shaking as he clicked it. Dear Mr. King, he would read aloud, his voice trembling. Please be advised that as of 9 a.m. this morning, the corporate guarantor for your lease, Soul City Legacy Holdings, has been dissolved. Amber's crying would stop. What? What does that mean? Andre would keep reading, his voice cracking. This action constitutes a material breach of your lease agreement per Section 14B. Failure to maintain an active guarantor. As such, your tenancy is hereby terminated effective immediately. You and all other occupants have 72 hours to vacate the premises. Amber would let out a sound, not a cry, a shriek, a raw animal sound of pure primal terror. 72 hours, Andre, 72 hours. The email would continue. Please be advised that your access fobs will be deactivated this Friday, November 10th at 5 p.m. Any personal property remaining after this time will be considered abandoned. We are sorry for any inconvenience this may cause. Andre would just stare at the screen. The car was gone. The $10,000 a month was gone. His credit was shot, and now the roof over his head was gone. In 3 days, he would be homeless. I knew what they would do next, because there was only one move left on the board. They had no money for a hotel. Serafina had clearly abandoned them to deal with her own crisis with Brad. They had no car. They had $14. They would have to use that money for a single taxi ride, a ride of shame. They would have to leave the shimmering glass towers of Buckhead and travel south. They would travel to the one place they despised, the one place they had mocked, the one place they thought was beneath them. They would have to go to the loser's house. I was there. I had been waiting in my West End studio all afternoon, the door locked. I sat in my old armchair, my trumpet on its stand beside me. The house was quiet. At 4:30 p.m. I heard a car door slam. Not a luxury European car door with its heavy, satisfying thunk. It was the thin, rattling slam of a Toyota Prius taxi. I heard footsteps running up the broken walkway, and then the pounding began. It wasn't a knock. It was a desperate, frantic, angry banging. "Dad! Dad, open the door! I know you're in there! Open the door, damn it!" I heard Amber's voice, hysterical. "Andre, break it down! He has to let us in! He can't do this!" The pounding continued. "Dad, please, we have nowhere to go. Please open the door." I let them bang, I let them yell, I let them feel the desperation that they had planned to inflict on me. I let them feel what it was like to be old and poor and locked out. After a full minute, when the banging had turned into frantic weeping pleas, I put down my coffee mug. I stood up. I walked slowly to the door. I turned the deadbolt. The click was loud in the silence. I opened the door. They stood there on my crumbling porch, and they looked pathetic. Andre's expensive suit was wrinkled, stained with something. His face was pale, unshaven, and streaked with tears of rage. Amber was beside him, her beautiful hair a mess, her designer dress looking like a costume, her mascara running in black rivers down her cheeks. They looked like what they were. Frauds. The moment he saw me, Andre's anger dissolved into a desperate plea. "Dad, thank God you have to help us. You have to—" He tried to push past me into the house, but I didn't move. I stood in the doorway, blocking him. "Help you with what, Andre?" "The apartment," he cried. They're kicking us out. They're evicting us. We have 3 days. 3 days, Dad. It's all a mistake. It has to be. You have to call them. You have to guarantee the lease." Amber pushed forward, her face a mask of desperation. "He's right, Gus. You have to co-sign for us. You have to call the bank or give us money for a new place. You can't let us be homeless." I looked at them. My son, my daughter-in-law, the two people who had sat in splendor just a few nights ago watching me be humiliated. I looked at Andre. "Co-sign, Andre. You want me to co-sign?" "Yes, please, whatever it takes." I let the silence hang in the air. I looked him dead in the eye. "Co-sign with what, son?" Andre blinked. What do you mean?" My voice was cold. It was quiet. It held all the power in the world. "I mean, what am I supposed to co-sign with the pension of a washed-up jazz musician, the savings of a man who lives in a crumbling house in the West End?" I took a step forward, and he flinched. "You told me in front of everyone that I was a loser. A loser can't guarantee a luxury apartment in Buckhead, Andre. A loser doesn't have the credit to co-sign for anything. My word means nothing. I'm a failure, remember?" The color drained from his face. He understood. This was not a mistake. This was not an accident. This was a choice. My choice. "Dad," he whispered, the word choked. "No. You did this." "I did nothing," I said, my voice sharp. "I simply stopped paying for your life. It turns out your entire life was built on the foundation of the very loser you despise." "But what about Brad?" Amber stammered. "He's the winner. You said to call him." "I did," Andre whispered, his voice hollow. "He won't help us." "That's a real shame," I said. I looked past them at the taxi waiting at the curb, the meter running. "It seems you're on your own. You two winners." "Dad, no!" Andre lunged, grabbing my shirt. "You can't do this. You can't. I'm your son. You owe me. You can't just throw us out on the street." I looked down at his hand on my shirt. I didn't move. "Owe you," I said, my voice dangerously soft. "I owed you love. I owed you a home when you were a child. I owed you an education. I paid all those debts, Andre. The rest, this life you built, this was all a bonus, and you just spat on it." I calmly peeled his fingers off my shirt. "But where will we go?" Amber wailed. "We have no money. We have nowhere." I looked at her, my face like stone. "I don't know, Amber, but you will have to figure it out, just like real grown-ups do." I stepped back into my house. Dad, please. Andre screamed, his voice breaking into a sob. Don't do this. I'm sorry. Okay. I'm sorry. I'm sorry too, Andre, I said. I'm sorry it took me 70 years to finally teach you a lesson. And with that, I closed the solid oak door. I didn't slam it. I closed it with a quiet final click. I turned the deadbolt. The sound was loud in the small, quiet house. On the other side of the door, the pounding began again. But this time it wasn't angry. It was the desperate, hopeless, terrified sound of two people who had just realized the game was over. And they had lost. I walked away from the door into my studio and picked up my trumpet. It was quiet for a week. 7 days. I spent that time in my penthouse. I played my Fazioli piano. The notes hung in the air, clean and clear, echoing in the high-ceilinged room. I drank my coffee strong and black. I read the financial reports Mr. Morrison sent over. Soul City Records had just finalized a new streaming deal that was worth 8 figures. I slept well for the first time in a long time. Down in the city, I knew my son's life was systematically disintegrating. Monday was the car, Tuesday was the money, Wednesday was the apartment. Andre and Amber were at this very moment homeless, carless, and had exactly $14 to their name. I imagined they had crawled to Serafina. I imagined the three of them were holed up in Brad Van Horn's gaudy mansion, blaming me, cursing me, trying to figure out how to get a lawyer with no money. I imagined they were a little knot of vipers turning on each other, their world shrinking. I didn't care. I had cut the cord. It was done. It was Saturday night, exactly 1 week after that dinner at Lavetta. I was in my study, a glass of bourbon neat in my hand. I was looking out over the Atlanta skyline, the lights glittering like a sea of fallen stars. I was at peace. Then the burner phone rang. The cheap plastic phone I kept only for them. It vibrated violently on the polished mahogany of my desk, an ugly, demanding, desperate sound in my quiet sanctuary. I looked at the screen. The name flashing was Serafina. My first instinct was to ignore it. What was there to say I had made my statement? But the ringing didn't stop. It was frantic. 1 ring, 2, 3, 10, 12. She wasn't just calling, she was panicked. A cold knot of curiosity, sharp and sudden, tightened in my stomach. This wasn't an angry call. This was a call for help. I let it ring 5 more times. Then I slowly picked up the receiver. Hello, Serafina? I was expecting her voice. The cold, cutting, superior voice she had used on me for a decade. I was expecting threats. I was expecting her to call me a monster for what I had done to her son. What I heard was not a voice I recognized. It was a sound. A raw, ragged, gulping sound like an animal caught in a trap. It was the sound of a person whose entire world had just been torn out from under them. Gus, is that you? Oh my God, Gus. You picked up. You have to help me. You have to help me. I stood up from my chair. I stood very, very still. This was not the script. This was something new. This was something terrible. Serafina, I said, my voice calm and low. Slow down. You're hysterical. Help you with what? He's gone, she shrieked, and the sound was so high and thin it barely sounded human. He's gone, Gus. He's just gone. I frowned. Who's gone, Andre? Is Andre all right? No, not Andre. Brad. He's gone, Gus. He disappeared. What are you talking about? I said, gripping the phone. He's a grown man. He probably went on a business trip. He's a winner. Remember, winners travel. No, she screamed. And this time it was a scream of pure, undiluted terror that made the hair on my arms stand up. You don't understand. The police are here. The police are in my house right now. They're walking through my living room. They're asking me questions, Gus. They're asking me questions I can't answer. My blood went cold. This was not my plan. My plan was to teach my son a lesson, to cut them off, to let them taste the real world. This was something else entirely. Serafina, I said, and my voice was sharp now, the voice of a man who runs a multimillion-dollar corporation. Stop crying and focus. Tell me exactly what happened. Why are the police at your house? I woke up this morning, she sobbed, her words tumbling out. He wasn't here. I thought he'd gone for a run, but his car was gone. His clothes from the closet, all his suitcases, gone. He just left me. So he left you, I said. That's not a matter for the police. That's a matter for a divorce lawyer. You're not listening, she wailed. The bank called, and then another bank, and then the police showed up an hour ago. It wasn't just his clothes, Gus. The accounts. They're empty. Everything my accounts. The house. The house, I said. The mortgage, Gus. He told me the house was paid for in cash. He told me it was a gift. It was a lie. The bank called. We're 6 months behind. They're foreclosing. They're taking the house. I closed my eyes. I saw it. I saw the whole house of cards, the flashy watch, the leased Bentley, the vague talk of $10 million deals. Brad Van Horn, the winner. And the police. I pressed my voice low. Why are they there, Serafina? Her voice dropped to a terrified whisper. I could barely hear her. It's not just the mortgage. It's his investors. The police said, oh God, Gus. They said he wasn't an investor. They said he was running a Ponzi scheme. They said he was a con artist and that I was his partner. Of course. It was so simple, so ugly, so perfectly horribly obvious. My ex-wife, in her desperate, blinding quest for shine, had married a common criminal, a fraud. They said, she was choking on her sobs now, they said his name, his real name isn't even Brad Van Horn. It's some other name. He's wanted in 3 states. And Gus, all the money you gave me in the divorce, the money I had, it's all gone. He took every penny. He drained the accounts. He left me with nothing but this house that isn't even mine and a dozen angry investors who think I stole their money. He ruined me. Gus, he ruined me. She was wailing now, the full crushing weight of her reality finally breaking her. I was silent. I was processing. I was connecting the dots, my small, quiet act of cutting off my son. It had been the stray butterfly wing that started a hurricane. Serafina, I said, why did he leave now? I don't know, she shrieked. He was fine yesterday. He was talking about his big deal. Wait. I heard her stop. I heard her sharp, sudden intake of breath. Oh my God, she whispered. Oh my God, you. Me, I said, playing dumb. It was you, she screamed. He was fine until Andre came here. Andre told him. He told him about the trust fund. He told him you had cut him off. Andre told him the money was gone. I stood in my silent $1 million penthouse and I finally understood. Brad Van Horn, the con artist, had been grooming Andre. He saw the BMW. He heard about the trust fund. He saw old family money. He wasn't just marrying Serafina. He was planning to fleece her entire family. That dinner at Lavetta, that $10 million deal, that was the bait. He was grooming me. And when Andre panicked and broke, ran to him, telling him the family loser had suddenly and mysteriously dissolved the trust. Brad didn't see a family squabble. He saw a threat. He thought I knew. He thought I was onto him. He thought I was a rival player who had just made the first move. He thought my cutting off Andre was an attack, a sign that I was about to freeze all the assets. He didn't wait to find out. He panicked. He took the money and he ran. My simple act of family justice had inadvertently and beautifully exposed a multi-state federal criminal. Gus, Serafina whispered, her voice hollow with the horrifying realization. He was trying to get you to invest, wasn't he? He was using me to get to you. Yes, Serafina, I said, my voice cold as the grave. I believe he was. And when you cut Andre off, Brad thought you had found him out. He thought the whole thing was about to collapse. She was putting the pieces together, her voice breaking with each new terrible truth. Your stupid family fight, it just blew up my entire life. I let her words hang in the air. My stupid family fight, I said. No, Serafina, your greed blew up your life. You married a reflection of yourself, and it shattered. GD, what am I going to do? She sobbed. The police are here. They're looking at me. They're taking my laptop. Gus, please, you have to help me. You're the only one who can. You have to tell them. You have to pay them. Pay them. The investors or my bail. Gus, please, for Andre, for what we used to have. I stood there looking at the city lights. I thought about her laugh in the restaurant. I thought about her calling me a relic. I thought about my son calling me a loser. GFs. I said, my voice calm. I have no idea what you're talking about. I'm just a poor old failed jazz musician. I don't have that kind of money. Gus, no, that's not. You can't. I can't, Serafina, I said. You should call a winner. You should call someone who knows how to make things happen. And I hung up the phone. I held the phone to my ear, my knuckles white. The bourbon sat untouched on the desk. Serafina, what are you talking about, police? That sounds crazy. Brad is a successful man. He closes $10 million deals. You told me yourself. I had to play the part. I had to be the slow, simple, loser ex-husband. I had to be the man she thought I was. A lie, she shrieked, her voice cracking. It was all a lie, Gus. Don't you understand? He's a con man, a fraud, a what did they call it? A Ponzi scheme. He was running a Ponzi scheme. A what? Serafina, that's movie stuff. You're not making any sense. You're just upset because he left. I'm not upset. I'm terrified, she screamed. The police are here. Not because he left Gus, because of what he left behind. He's gone. He packed his bags and he cleaned out everything. And he left me to face them. I sat down in my chair, my heart beating a slow, steady, cold rhythm. Face who, Serafina? The police, and the investors, and the banks. Oh God, Gus, the banks. She was hyperventilating now, the words tumbling out in a broken, wet sob. I woke up this morning. He was gone. I thought he'd gone for a run just like he always does, but his closet was empty, Gus. The closet, all his suits, his shoes, his suitcases, gone. Okay, I said, keeping my voice soft, confused. So he packed his bags. That's bad, Serafina, but it's not. Then the bank called. She cut me off. The main bank. They were asking why I had missed the last 6 mortgage payments, 6 Gus, 6 months. But the house, I said. You told me, Brad told Andre, the house was paid for in cash, a wedding gift. It was a lie, she roared, her voice breaking into a desperate wail. He never paid for it. He just faked the documents. He was just paying the mortgage every month to keep up the show, and he must have stopped paying 6 months ago. The bank said the house is in foreclosure. They're seizing it. They're seizing it on Monday. I'm going to be homeless. Gus, homeless. Serafina, I said. I don't know what to say. That's terrible. That's not even the worst of it, she sobbed. That's not why the police are here. It's the investments. That $10 million deal he talked about at dinner. That stupid Dubai property. It was all fake. Fake. It doesn't exist. There is no property. He was just collecting money from his friends, from his clients. He was just taking their money and putting it in his own account, and then she couldn't breathe. She was choking on the words. And then what, Serafina? And then he'd find new investors. She whispered, her voice hollow. And he'd use their money to pay dividends to the old investors, to make it look like it was real, to keep them all happy. A Ponzi scheme, I said, stating the obvious. Yes, she cried. And the police are here because one of the investors, some powerful man from Chicago, he found out. He called the SEC. He called the FBI, and they traced it all back. And Brad must have known. He must have gotten a tip, so he ran. My God, Serafina, that's just awful. You still don't get it, do you? She hissed, a new sharp note of pure, undiluted terror entering her voice. You think I'm just sad because I'm broke? You think I'm just upset because my husband left me? I assumed. He didn't just run Gus. He left me holding everything. The police. They're not here for him. They're here for me. I stood up. For you? Why you didn't do anything? Because he put it all in my name, she screamed, and the sound was so full of despair it was almost an animal noise. All of it, Gus. The company, Van Horn Enterprises. It's registered to Serafina King. The bank accounts where the investors sent their money. They're my accounts. The fake documents, the fraudulent contracts, the wire transfers. He made me sign them. He told me they were tax shelters. He told me it was standard procedure for high net worth individuals. He told me I was his business partner. She was crying so hard she could barely speak. I thought I was being a supportive wife. I thought I was part of the winner's circle. And all this time, he was just using me. He was setting me up. He was making me the face of his entire criminal operation. I was silent. The magnitude of his treachery was breathtaking, even for me. "He's gone," she whispered. "He's probably on a plane to some country with no extradition treaty. And I'm here. I'm broke. My divorce settlement from you, he invested it for me. It's gone. My new money. It's gone. And I'm about to be arrested. For fraud. For conspiracy. For God knows what else. They're looking at me right now, Gus. The detective. He's staring at me through the living room window. He's just staring." She was right. The man wasn't just a con artist. He was a professional. He had found the perfect mark. A woman so desperate for wealth and status, so blinded by shine, that she would happily blindly sign anything he put in front of her just to be part of his world. And he had just pulled the ripcord, leaving her to take the entire impact of the crash all by herself. "Gus," she said, her voice suddenly small, the voice of a terrified child. "Gus, please, you have to help me. I didn't know. I swear to God I didn't know what he was doing. I was a fool. I was so stupid, but I'm not a criminal. You know me. I'm not." "Serafina, what can I do?" I asked, my voice still the picture of the confused, overwhelmed old man. "The police are there. This is millions of dollars. I'm just a musician." "No," she snapped. "No, you can get a lawyer. A good one. You must have some money, your savings. The house in the West End, you can mortgage it. You have to, for Andre. If I go to prison, what will happen to Andre?" Ah, there it was. The final desperate manipulation. Our son. "I don't know, Serafina," I stammered. "This is all just... it's too much. I need to think. How could this even happen?" I was playing my part, but as I said it, a new cold thought entered my mind. A question. A real question. She was right. Brad was a professional. He had been running this scam for months, maybe years. Why did he run? Why now? Why this specific Saturday? This wasn't just a random collapse. Something had spooked him. Something had made him abandon a multi-million-dollar scam and his perfectly placed scapegoat. Something had made him run. I looked at the burner phone in my hand. I thought about the dinner. I thought about Andre's desperate, angry face. And suddenly I knew. I stood there holding the receiver of the burner phone, my bourbon sitting untouched on the desk. "Serafina," I said, and I made my voice sound slow, halting, confused. The voice of the old, simple man she believed me to be. "Serafina, this is terrible. I can't believe it, but I don't understand. If he was running this big scam, why would he run now? This morning, if the police were just now getting involved, why not last week? Why not next week? It doesn't make any sense." There was a sudden sharp silence on the other end. The hysterical gulping sobs stopped as if someone had thrown a switch. I heard her take a single ragged breath. "Wait," she whispered. The word was hollow. "What? What did you just say?" "I just said I don't understand why he would leave today." I repeated, playing the part of the confused old fool. "It seems so sudden." "Sudden," she repeated. Her voice was flat. "Yes, it was sudden. He was fine last night. He was fine. He came home from the office, we had dinner. He was laughing. He was talking about his big deal. He was perfectly fine. And then, I could hear the gears turning in her mind, the sound of her world finding its final terrible logic. "Andre," she whispered. The word was so quiet I almost missed it. "What?" I asked. "What about Andre?" "Andre." Her voice jumped suddenly sharp. "He came here. After Brad kicked him out of the office. He came here last night. He was a complete mess. He was crying. He was yelling. He was telling me what you did." "What I did," I said, my voice full of innocent confusion. "Serafina, I haven't done anything. I just talked to him on the phone." "You did everything," she shrieked, the hysteria returning, but this time it was different. It wasn't just fear. It was realization. "You cut him off. That's what you did. You cut off the trust fund. You took his car. You're kicking him out of his apartment. He came here screaming that you had finally gone crazy, that the loser dad had ruined him. That was just a family matter, Serafina, I said softly. A terrible argument, but that has nothing to do with Brad Van Horn. It has everything to do with him. Her scream was so loud I had to pull the phone away from my ear. You fool, she spat. You absolute naive, sentimental fool. Do you think he married me for my sparkling personality? Do you think he cared about me? He was using me. He was using me to get to you. To me, I asked, and my performance of shock was, I have to admit, quite convincing. Why me, Serafina? I'm a retired musician. I have nothing. That's what I thought, she cried. That's what he thought. But that wasn't the point. He didn't think you were rich. He just thought you were stable. He thought you were old money, undiscovered, untapped. She was pacing now. I could hear her heels clicking frantically on her soon-to-be repossessed marble floor. That whole dinner at Lavetta, that wasn't for me. That was for you, Gus. That entire performance. The $10 million deal, the talk about vision, the Bentleys, the Dubai trips, that was all a show. He was baiting the hook. He spent the last 2 months telling me how your son Andre had this mysterious family trust, how that trust was just the tip of the iceberg. He kept asking about you. Does your ex-husband have savings? Does he own that little house outright? He seems smart, frugal. Frugal people always have a nest egg. He was, oh God, he was planning to make me convince you to invest. Her voice cracked. He was going to use me to get you to empty your quaint little retirement savings, all your frugal money, into his $10 million deal. He saw you as the final score, Gus. The loser dad, the quiet one no one was watching. You were his retirement plan. I said nothing. I let her unravel. And then, she said, her voice dropping to a low, trembling hiss. And then after that dinner, after he had laid the perfect trap, his other mark, his son-in-law Andre, comes to him, not with investment money, but broke, crying, panicked. Andre tells him that the trust fund is gone. Not just late, not just a missed payment, but dissolved. The bank used that word. Dissolved. He told Brad that his father, you, had just cut him off completely out of nowhere with no warning. She took a deep, shuddering breath. I could hear the police sirens in the background closer now. Gus, she whispered, and I could hear the last pieces of her world falling into place. You have to understand what that looks like. To a man like Brad. A man like that, a man who lives on lies and shadows. He doesn't think in terms of family drama. He doesn't believe in angry fathers. He thinks in terms of threats. He thinks in terms of who knows. Her voice was rising, getting faster and faster, a torrent of horrifying comprehension. He didn't see an angry father. He saw an opponent. He saw the secret, silent grantor of the trust fund suddenly, violently, and legally pull all the money off the table. He must have thought you knew. He must have thought you'd found him out, that you knew he was a fraud. Serafina, that's... Don't you get it? She screamed, the sound tearing from her throat. He thought your call to the bank was your first move. He thought you were the one who called the FBI. He thought you were the one who tipped off the investor in Chicago. He thought you were freezing the assets. He didn't see a loser, Gus. He saw a player who was smarter than him, a player who was coming for him. He didn't wait to find out. She was sobbing now, a terrible, dry, choking sound. He didn't wait for your next move. He saw the first crack in the dam, and he ran. He grabbed the emergency cash, and he ran. It was you, she shrieked, the accusation finally landing, aimed at the wrong target. It was your stupid, petty little power play with Andre. You were trying to teach your son a lesson about manners, and you just blew everything up. You scared him off. If you had just left it alone, he would still be here. We would still be fine, but you had to be the big man. You had to cut him off, and you scared him away. You ruined me. He's gone. Gus, she wailed. He's gone, and he left me with all of it. The police. They're walking up the stairs. They're coming to the room. Oh, God. Oh, God. Gus. I heard a muffled sound, a man's voice, firm and official. Ma'am, I need you to put the phone down. We need to ask you some questions. The line went dead. I stood there in my silent penthouse holding the cheap burner phone. My hand was perfectly steady. The city lights were perfectly clear. I looked at my untouched glass of bourbon. I had done it. She was right. I had done it. I had pulled a single small insignificant thread. The thread that was paying for my son's arrogant lifestyle. And in doing so, I had unraveled an entire criminal empire. I didn't just teach my son a lesson. I had inadvertently and beautifully destroyed the very winner he so admired. I had saved Serafina from her own toxic greed, though she would never ever see it that way. I had taken out the trash. Brad Van Horn thought I was a loser. He thought I was a small, easy mark, a final payday. He never realized that in this game I was the predator and he was just the bait. My son called me a loser, and in doing so, he had, in the most perfect twist of fate, saved me the trouble of ever having to prove him wrong. I had won. I picked up the bourbon, swirled the amber liquid, and took a long, slow sip. It was the best drink I'd had in 10 years. Here is the lesson learned and the call to action as requested. The call from Detective Miller came the next morning. It wasn't on the burner phone. It was on my private, unlisted number. "Mr. King," he said, his voice respectful, "I know you're not directly involved, but as Mrs. Van Horn's ex-husband and Mr. Andre King's father, we'll need you to come in just to verify some of her timeline. A formality." "Of course, Detective," I said. "I'll be there this afternoon." I hung up the phone. A formality. He had no idea. At 3 p.m., the Atlanta sun was high and hot. The downtown police precinct was a squat, ugly brick building that smelled like stale coffee disinfectant and quiet desperation. The fluorescent lights inside hummed, casting a sick greenish glow on the stressed-looking people waiting on hard plastic benches. Then my car arrived. It didn't just pull up, it appeared. A silent midnight black Rolls-Royce Cullinan gliding to the curb as if it were moving on a cushion of air. It was so out of place in this neighborhood, so impossibly clean and expensive, that the officers smoking by the front door stopped mid-sentence. They just stared. The car sat there for a long, quiet moment. Then my chauffeur, a tall man named James, stepped out from the driver's side. He wore a simple, perfectly tailored black suit. He didn't rush. He walked calmly around the front of the vehicle, straightened his tie, and opened my rear passenger door. I took my time. I stepped out onto the cracked pavement. The man who emerged was not the man my son had screamed at. He was not the man in the old tweed jacket and worn-out shoes. Today, I wore a custom-tailored Tom Ford suit. It was a deep, dark charcoal wool so fine it looked like liquid shadow. It fit my 70-year-old frame with a precision that cost more than my son's leased BMW. My shoes were black hand-stitched Italian leather polished to a mirror shine. On my wrist, I wore a Patek Philippe Calatrava. No diamonds. No flash. Just a simple, quiet statement of power that Brad Van Horn with his gaudy, oversized watch would never understand. I was no longer Gus. I was Augustus King. James handed me my briefcase, a simple, elegant leather case. "Wait for me here, James," I said. "I don't imagine this will take long." "Very good, Mr. King." I turned and walked toward the precinct doors. The officers by the entrance instinctively straightened up as I approached. One of them, a young man, actually opened the door for me. I nodded my thanks and walked in. The entire waiting room went silent. The shift in atmosphere was immediate. The bored desk sergeant, who had been half asleep looking at his computer, sat up straight in his chair. The people on the benches stopped fidgeting. When you have spent your life pretending to be invisible, you become hyper-aware of what it feels like to be seen. And they were seeing me. They didn't see a loser. They didn't see a relic. But they saw what I had hidden for a decade. They saw money, yes, but more than that, they saw power. They saw a man who was not to be trifled with. I walked directly to the front desk. My shoes made no sound on the worn linoleum floor. The desk sergeant looked up, his eyes wide, taking in the suit, the watch, the undeniable aura of command. Can I help you, sir?" he stammered. "Good afternoon, officer," I said. My voice was not the reedy, quiet tone of Gus. It was the voice I used to close deals, the voice that owned 50% of Soul City Records. It was deep, resonant, and calm. "My name is Augustus King. Detective Miller is expecting me. I am here to provide a statement regarding my son Andre King and my ex-wife Serafina Van Horn." The sergeant fumbled with his phone. "Yes, sir," "Mr. King, right away, sir. He's expecting you. I'll let him know you're here." As I stood there waiting, I saw a door open at the end of the hall. Two officers were escorting a figure in handcuffs. It was Andre. He was a wreck. He was wearing the same wrinkled suit from the night at the restaurant 3 days ago. He was unshaven, his hair was matted, and his eyes were red and wild with panic and lack of sleep. He looked up and he saw me. He stopped dead in his tracks. The officers had to tug on his arm. He just stared. He wasn't looking at Dad. He was looking at a stranger. He was looking at a man in an $8,000 suit. He was looking at a man who had just arrived in a Rolls Royce. He was looking at a man who was standing there with the calm, patient, and terrifying authority of a king. His mouth opened. No sound came out. His brain simply could not compute what it was seeing. I didn't smile. I didn't scowl. I just held his gaze. I just let him see. "Dad," he whispered. The word was a tiny, broken sound. Before I could answer, Detective Miller came rushing out. "Mr. King, thank you for coming in. Please, right this way." He gestured down the hall away from my son. I gave Andre one last long look, a look that said, "The game is over." Then I turned my back on him and followed the detective. Detective Miller led me down a long, fluorescent-lit hallway. The floor was a pale, sickly green linoleum scuffed with the marks of 1,000 heavy boots. The sound of my own handmade leather shoes was offensively quiet, out of place. The air smelled of burnt coffee and industrial cleaner. "They're in here, Mr. King," Miller said. He opened a heavy door marked Interview Room 3. "Just a few questions to get your side of the timeline. We're trying to understand how Mr. Van Horn operated." I nodded. "Of course, Detective. Whatever you need." I stepped into the room, and I stopped. It was like a terrible painting, a masterpiece of desperation. They were all there. Serafina was sitting at a small metal table under a buzzing fluorescent light that was cruel and unforgiving. The light bleached all the color from her face, making her look not just tired, but ancient. Her emerald silk dress from the restaurant, or perhaps another one just as expensive, was deeply wrinkled as if she had slept in it. Her hair, which had been so perfectly styled, was falling out of its elegant bun in damp, stringy sections. Her makeup was a smeared, tragic mask. She was staring at a styrofoam cup of coffee on the table, her hands cuffed not to the table but to each other in her lap. On a hard plastic bench against the far wall sat my son Andre and his wife Amber. They were the very picture of ruin. Andre was still wearing the same suit from 2 days ago, the one I had last seen him in on my porch. It was rumpled, stained, and it hung on him. He had his head in his hands, just staring at the floor between his feet. Amber was next to him, her knees pulled up to her chest, her arms wrapped around them. She was weeping quietly, a constant, exhausted, hiccuping sound. They were no longer the vibrant, arrogant couple from the restaurant. They were refugees. Detective Miller cleared his throat. "Mrs. Van Horn, Mr. Andre King, this is Augustus King. He's here to provide a witness statement." They all looked up at the sound of my name. The reaction was slow. It was not immediate recognition. It was a gradual, horrifying dawning. Serafina's eyes, red-rimmed and hollow, lifted from her coffee cup. They passed over me, then snapped back, widening in disbelief. She wasn't seeing Gus, the poor, pathetic musician. She was seeing the Tom Ford suit. She was seeing the Patek Philippe watch. She was seeing the man who had walked out of the police station lobby and into a chauffeured Rolls Royce. Her mind, already shattered by Brad's betrayal, simply could not process this new reality. "Gus," she whispered. Her voice was a dry, broken rasp. It wasn't a question. It was a plea for the world to start making sense again. At the sound of his mother's voice, Andre's head snapped up. He saw me. He saw the man from the restaurant, the man from the porch, the man from the precinct lobby. This man was not Dad. This man was an immaculate, powerful, terrifying stranger who just happened to be wearing his father's face. He looked at my suit. He looked at my shoes. He looked at my calm, steady, and pitiless gaze. "Dad," he breathed. The word was full of a child's terror. It was the sound of someone seeing a ghost, or worse, realizing the ghost had been the only real thing in the room all along. Amber just stared, her mouth open, her tears frozen on her cheeks. "And this," Detective Miller said, gesturing behind me, "is his legal counsel, Mr. Morrison, who will be present for the statement." As if on cue, Mr. Morrison, tall, impeccable, and carrying a briefcase that probably cost more than Brad's first car, stepped into the room beside me. He nodded once curtly at the room. His presence filled the small, grimy space with an aura of corporate, high-priced, and absolutely lethal law. This was the final piece. Serafina's eyes darted from me to Morrison and then back to me. The con artist's wife finally understood. She wasn't just dealing with a relic. She was in a room with a powerhouse. "No," Serafina whispered, shaking her head. "No, I don't understand. Gus, what is this?" "Andre." My son just continued to stare at me, his eyes wide with a dawning catastrophic horror. He was finally connecting the dots. The car, the trust fund, the apartment, the clothes, the car, Brad's sudden disappearance. It wasn't a bank error. It wasn't bad luck. It was me. "Dad," he whispered again, and this time his voice was trembling. "What did you do?" I looked at my son, Andre, his face a mask of pale confusion, staring at me as if I were a complete stranger. I looked at Serafina, cuffed and broken her mind, visibly scrambling to assemble the pieces of a puzzle that made no sense to her. And I looked at Mr. Morrison, who was the picture of calm corporate power. I did not have to say a word. I had paid Morrison for this. This was his performance. He placed his elegant leather briefcase on the metal table. The click of the latches opening was the only sound in the room. Detective Miller leaned against the wall, watching content to let the real show begin. Morrison did not look at Andre or Amber. He spoke directly to Serafina, his voice polite, professional, and utterly devoid of pity. "Mrs. Van Horn," he began, "my name is Morrison. I am Mr. Augustus King's business manager and personal attorney." Serafina just stared at him. "Business manager," she whispered. What business?" Morrison ignored her question. "We are here at Detective Miller's request, but I believe I can clarify the timeline that seems to be confusing everyone." He paused, letting the silence stretch. "It appears your associate, Mr. Brad Van Horn, made a rather sudden departure yesterday. He ran," Serafina hissed, her eyes filling with rage. "He left me. He is a con artist, yes," Morrison said calmly. "And we believe his departure was not random. It appears, Mrs. Van Horn, that Mr. Van Horn became, let's say, spooked. His flight seems to coincide exactly with the moment the King Family Heritage Trust was suddenly and irrevocably dissolved." The room went absolutely still. Andre, who had been staring at the floor, snapped his head up. Serafina frowned, the confusion on her face complete. "The trust fund. The inheritance. What does that have to do with anything?" That was Andre's money. From his grandparents. How could that scare Brad?" I watched her. I watched her mind work, trying to find a new angle, a new person to blame. She still didn't see it. After all these years, she still looked right at me and saw nothing. Mr. Morrison almost smiled. It was a cold, thin expression that barely touched his lips. "No, Mrs. Van Horn," he said, his voice soft, almost gentle, which made it 1,000 times more brutal. "There was no inheritance. There were no grandparents. There was no King Family Heritage Trust." Andre stood up from the bench. "What? That's a lie. I've been getting that money for 5 years, $10,000 a month. I've seen the bank statements." "You saw a name, Mr. King," Morrison corrected him, not even bothering to look at him. "You saw a legal fiction, a name on an account created for the sole purpose of providing you with a discretionary allowance." "An allowance," Andre said, his voice cracking. "From who?" And this was the moment all the tumblers in the lock finally fell into place. Mr. Morrison turned his gaze slowly from Serafina to Andre, and then for the first time he gestured a simple, elegant motion of his hand toward me. "From him," he said. Andre and Serafina both just stared at me. "The trust," Morrison continued, his voice like a surgeon's scalpel, "was funded entirely every single month by Mr. Augustus King. The luxury apartment you live in, Mr. King, is not leased by you. It is owned by a holding company, which in turn is owned by Mr. King. The BMW M5 that was repossessed on Monday was not your car. It was leased by Mr. King's corporation. For the past 5 years, Mrs. Van Horn, Mr. King has been paying for your son's car, his home, his credit card bills, and his entire lifestyle." He leaned forward slightly. "Mr. King was the bank, Mrs. Van Horn. He was the family asset you were all relying on. And last Saturday night, after let's call it a disappointing family dinner, he simply decided to close the bank." Serafina's mouth opened. A small, strange, choking sound came out. She was not looking at me as a fool anymore. She was looking at me in pure, abject horror. She finally understood. She understood that in her blind hunger for shine, she hadn't just married a con man, she had divorced the real money. She had left the king, and for 10 years she had been laughing at his power, completely unaware that her entire new life, her son's entire platform, was still being funded by the very relic she despised. And Andre, my son. He sank back onto the bench as if his legs had been cut out from under him. He was looking at his hands, he was putting it all together. The insult at the restaurant, the cold finality of my voice on the phone, the car disappearing, the money vanishing, the eviction notice. And now, Serafina's total, complete ruin. He understood that his words, his one stupid, arrogant, drunken act of defiance in that restaurant had been the trigger. He had insulted his father, and in doing so, he had spooked the con man who was bankrupting his mother. He hadn't just been yelling at a loser. He had been yelling at the man holding the strings to his entire world, and to his mother's. He had destroyed them all. He slid off the bench. He didn't just stand. He slid his legs, giving way until he was on his knees on the filthy linoleum floor of the interview room. He crawled the 2 feet between the bench and my chair. "Dad," he whispered. He put his trembling hand on my knee. "Dad, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I didn't know." I looked down at him. My 40-year-old son kneeling at my feet, a broken, weeping child. I looked at Serafina, who was just staring into the void, her life in ashes. I looked at Andre and I felt nothing. Not anger, not pity, just a vast, cold emptiness. I spoke and my voice was quiet, but it filled the small room. "You were right about one thing, Andre," I said. "I am a failure." Right. He looked up, his eyes full of desperate hope, ready for me to forgive him. "I failed," I continued, "by letting you believe that life was easy. I failed by protecting you from the world. I failed by letting you think that money just appears, that cars are just given, that apartments just happen. I failed by raising a son who at 40 years old doesn't know how to stand on his own 2 feet. I stood up, pushing his hand off my leg. "You wanted a winner," I said, looking down at him, at Amber, at Serafina. "You wanted to be around someone who makes things happen." I straightened my Tom Ford suit. I nodded to Mr. Morrison, who picked up his briefcase. "Well," I said, turning my back on them, "now you all have the chance to learn how to be winners for yourselves." I walked out of the room. I didn't look back. I left them there in the cold green light of the police station to face the detective, their creditors, and the unchangeable, brutal truth of what they had done. What I learned from all of this is that the brightest smiles often hide the sharpest teeth. I spent decades of my life practicing kindness, believing that love and sacrifice were enough. I thought my generosity was a virtue, but my family saw it as a weakness to be exploited. They mistook my silence for ignorance and my humility for poverty. The truest and most painful lesson is this: money does not create monsters, it only reveals the ones who were hiding there all along. Never let anyone, especially your own family, make you feel worthless just because they are blinded by greed. True power is not about what you have in the bank, it is about knowing your own worth when everyone else has forgotten it. If you have ever had to fight for respect from the very people who should have given it to you, freely share your story in the comments below. And please don't forget to subscribe for more stories of justice served.